I'm Rob,
I'm Nate.
and welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. This is week 2 of Jessica Chastain month.
And our film for today is a rather different kind of film. I hesitate to even call it a movie. It is a film. It is one that I have seen before. It is Terrence Malick's 2011 release, The Tree of Life. I saw it once before back in 2012, so it's been 9 years since I've seen this. And I wanted to revisit it, and some of my memory of it was kind of fuzzy, which is part of why I wasn't sure how much you'd like it.
Now, let's...
But we need to just go right into it.
hold on, let's lead off by saying this is a spoiler cast.
Yeah.
We are going to spoil as much as is possible to be spoiled of this film, I have a feeling.
Yeah.
So...
It's something. It's go at it. First impressions.
I think I have more questions than anything else. First of all, why? Why pick this one?
Did you like it?
We'll get there.
Because it's absolutely beautiful.
It is. Yeah, I agree with that. This film is tricky. It's beautiful. It is very layered. Mm-hmm. It's also very... How do I phrase this? It's not exactly clearly laid out.
No, nor should it be. It's a meditation. It's a dream. It's a symphony, and very overtly so in some ways.
Yeah. It's
biblical. It's cosmic. There's an awful lot in this film. It's a film that's both absolutely massive in scale, about as much as you can imagine, and also really intimate and tiny.
Yeah. There's also things that at times seem like they might be big plot elements, and then they seem to have been the loosest of thread at the same time, which makes this kind of tricky. But I mean, obviously you don't see something like this every day.
No. Yeah.
So what were your first impressions the first time you saw it?
And we'll get a little bit into the writer-director later on, and I think certain things will come into more focus when we talk about him. But I knew Terrence Malick's reputation. I think I'd probably seen one of his films before I saw this. I think I've seen probably about 4. This is easily my favorite of his film. I remember I was really affected by it. I reread the interview I wrote, or the review I wrote on it in 2012, and I was gushing then, and I'm kind of gushing now. I like it as much or more on second viewing, and I almost wondering why I haven't seen it since then. But this is one that you don't want to watch that often.
No.
You almost want to do what I did, which is forget a lot of it and then rediscover it, because I was kind of concerned, because Terrence Malick's films are known for being two things. They're known for being visually breathtaking and slow. And I was concerned that the slow would maybe overwhelm the visuals, but I was more or less riveted throughout this.
No, the visuals in this are extremely powerful. There's nothing there's nothing that's going to overwhelm those visuals in this. Yeah.
And I find it very affecting then. I found it affecting now. I don't know if you noticed, but I was crying throughout this movie.
I wondered at a couple points.
Yeah, it's just amazing. It's quite the movie.
Yeah, it has parts where it's deeply spiritual.
Well, it talks about very early on about the duality, when the mother has that narrative at the very beginning of the film, and they talk about that there's two ways. There's the way of nature and the way of grace. And the way of grace is personified by the mother, who played by Jessica Chastain, who is the angel mother of angel mothers. And the way of nature is personified by the father, played by Brad Pitt, who is, I think, a good man, but a man very frustrated by the way his life has turned out. There's a beautiful music throughout this film, classical music. And you find out this classical music is the dad's. The dad dreamed of being a concert pianist, and it didn't work out for him, and he ended up an engineer, a hard worker. Everything was a struggle for him. And he took it out on his wife and on the kids. I don't know if I'd call him, maybe at times abusive, but I don't think he was generally an abusive person.
There's a couple things that allude to him being abusive. There's, some of those whisper scenes,
Yeah.
where you're having that like transitionary imagery. The boy says, "Why does he hurt us?"
But I also think part of that is the perception of a young kid, because this film.
And I had that thought
Yeah.
as it was going, but then you have that fight scene at the table.
Yeah, there's the one fight scene. Yeah.
And the kind of combination of the circumstances and the way the kids sometimes seem to be operating in so much fear in their bedroom,
Yeah.
it kind of made me wonder.
Yeah.
But again, this film, there's almost nothing in this film is actually defined.
Yeah. So the bulk of the film, you've got segments showing the creation of the universe. There are dinosaurs in this movie, and I bet you were not expecting there to be dinosaurs in this
No.
movie. And then you have possibly the end of the world, and you have the afterlife,
Mm-hmm.
and you have Sean Penn as the main kid grown up, and he's an architect, and he's reflecting back on his childhood. And there's stuff with him as a newborn baby and a toddler, and a little bit of his parents before he was born. But the bulk of this seems to be 1 year. Maybe they're in school part of the time, but it feels like it's mostly summer. Like 5 months.
I got the
maybe a
impression
year.
that it was a span of a couple years, but
Okay. And the kids are, 10, 10, 11.
because that schoolgirl that he follows home,
Yeah.
then she seems. You see more aging out of her than anyone.
Yeah. But it's Texas, specifically Waco, Texas, sometime in the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
And the boy, Jack, and his 3 brothers growing up in this little house. They all share a room. All the 3 beds with 3 boys. And childhood and just these little snippets of things that you'd remember. And it made me weep at times. There's just such a purity of it, and the main kid who has a child is played by Hunter McCracken, and the 2 others. They almost don't seem like they're just kids. Like they're just hardly acting. This movie feels really real, and it feels super specific. It feels like you're watching a memoir, but I think a lot of this is fictional. For example, Malick, who directed this, did not grow up in Texas, grew up in Illinois. And I don't know much about his childhood, but it feels real, and I'm sure parts of it are real, but it's a composite, and it's a fictional story. But it explores, certain universal themes. It's about a struggle between grace and hard nature. And it's just a beautiful film.
And you witness much of that struggle between nature and grace between just inside of Jack.
Yeah. Yes, because there's the time where him and his buddies are playing, and they find this frog, and they got a firecracker. So they tie the frog on the firecracker, and they launch the rocket. He feels so guilty. He tells his mom.
Yeah.
A lot of kids wouldn't do that, but he felt like, I killed this animal, and I feel horrible about it, and I have to tell my mom. And that really shows something. And then there's also the extreme anger he shows at times, especially towards his father, and how he wishes he was
takes
dead.
that out on his brother at times.
Yeah. And then
that scene where he clearly is contemplating dropping the car on his father.
dropping the car on his father. Yeah, that's a wonderful scene, because he's thinking about it. He's considering it. He doesn't do it, but he thought about it. And the scenes where he yells at his father, and where he because his mother very devout Catholic, and his father, they're church-going people, and how he prays to God, for his father
to take his father.
I even wrote down some of the scripts, what he says. It says, "Please God, kill him, let him die, get him out of here." But then there's that moment where his father's in their little side garden, and he just kind of comes, they've had a fight, and he just kind of comes up, they kind of look at each other, and he goes to the garden, and he helps his father, with the plants. And so there's these 2 things, the force personified by the mother and the force personified by the father, pulling back and forth, and really casting the adult version of him as Sean Penn is just great. Because Sean Penn looking at the camera and contemplating totally works.
There's also the imagery of, in that scene where I think it was filmed in Goblin Valley, Utah, but there's that scene where Sean Penn walks through the door, and then you have the young Jack, played by Hunter McCracken, and Sean Penn playing on the same area.
Yeah.
And that's obviously like intended to be
some things
transition between the two.
Yeah, some things get really abstract. One image that I love fairly early in the film is the boy is in his room, and the room is full of water, and like his stuff's floating around, and he swims out the door, and then they cut to his mother giving birth.
Yeah.
And so sometimes there's these little segments, like there's the segment where the kid's in the attic going around on the tricycle, and there's the tall man with the book. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, there's a number of those that you don't really have any.
It's dream logic. It works as like there's something about it, you can't pin it down, but there's something about that works.
One of the most beautiful parts of this movie for me, it's kind of in the middle. Brad Pitt is on his trip, and while he's on his trip, young Jack's behavior really kind of starts to change and gets a little bit darker. This is when they have it's shortly after the fight at the dinner table, and then in the kitchen. And then Brad Pitt leaves on his trip, and the kids start breaking the windows. They launch the frog on the rocket. And then he goes and breaks into that girl's house, rifles through her drawers, steals her slip.
And then he's absolutely the guilt that he has.
But he comes home, and after he gets home and talks to his mother, there's the scene with the lamp where he's telling his brother to put the wire in it and put his finger in it, and joking about electrocuting his brother. And the next scene after that is kind of one of these transition scenes, and you just hear his voice in the background, and it says, "How do I get back?" Yeah. So clearly he's recognizing that
he's
something is changing in him, and that he doesn't necessarily like the change. Yeah. And that's a complex faith interaction.
Yeah, this is very much about the complicated feelings of growing up. And going back to where he steals the slip, and he's walking down by the river, and he's kind of startled by a boat, and he's just like convinced somebody is seeing him and catching him, and he puts the slip in the river and just go away. There's certain moods and things that not always like a direct parallel, but it's like I remember feeling that, and it really evoked certain childhood and memories in me, and just the sense of being a child.
One of the few questions I have about this, like there's kind of that early couple scenes where it keeps jumping back and forth between Jessica Chastain, Brad Pitt, and Sean Penn, and what is implied to be Sean Penn's future wife. And there's the scene in particular where Jessica Chastain gets the news, seems to call Brad Pitt, and he's at the airport, and it seems like there's a grief thing there, like someone's been lost. And simultaneously, in the parallel, we now know future, Sean Penn and his wife also seem to be grieving something. But then that's when it kind of flashes back, but that's never resolved, and that's one of the few kind of complaints I have about this movie is, what was that grieving scene at the beginning?
What was the inciting incident for the reflection that is this movie?
Well, when I saw that scene initially with Jessica Chastain and Brad Pitt, I assumed one of the kids had died.
Yeah. Well, one of them did. So the very beginning scene of the... And again,
but it's not clear who.
A lot of this isn't always clear. But the very beginning scene... And so when I was thinking of this movie, I thought this movie started with the creation of the universe and the dinosaurs. I forgot that there was the setup things with the Brad Pitt and then the Sean Penn at the beginning before they went into that. But the very beginning sequence is Jessica Chastain is at home and gets a notice, and it turns out that this is that one of the kids had died at 19, and they have a funeral sequence, and it's not absolutely clear who that was. Obviously it wasn't Jack, because Jack grows up to become the architect Sean Penn. I think it was the youngest brother. The middle brother doesn't get a ton of screen time. It's mostly Jack and the younger brother, who's the scrawny blonde.
Yeah.
And he died at 19 in probably sometime in the 1960s, maybe in the early 70s. Vietnam comes to mind, even though if he had died in conflict, it would probably have been a soldier or something that showed up to let them know. But that's kind of my takeaway on that. But you're right that it feels like something, maybe an anniversary or something.
Well, it kind of makes me wonder because then when it jumps forward, you have Sean Penn and his what is I presume to be his wife. Seems like they're going through some form of grief, and it makes me wonder if this reflection back on his childhood was a result of like the parallel between this previous loss and now the current loss.
Well, they talk about that the mother has died, because there's a scene in the Sean Penn storyline where he calls his dad. His dad's still alive, and he's apologizing to his dad for something he said to him, possibly in conjunction with maybe the mother had recently died, and he said something at the funeral or something. My best guess is that the mother died, and that's what prompted the flashbacks.
Okay, so maybe not like a Sean Penn's child type thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because you'd think that they would maybe work that in. Though this movie...
none of it's clear.
This movie is, 2 hours and 19 minutes long. Honestly, it feels longer, which is not an insult, but it does feel longer than 2 hours and 19 minutes. There is a 3 hour, 9 minute cut of this movie. A director's cut, which maybe explains that to the extent to which this movie would explain anything. I don't know if I want to see the longer.
There's some kind of unusual imagery also around that scene. Probably the only time I thought maybe I knew where this was going, which clearly no one knows where this is going when you're watching it, is in that kind of transition after Sean Penn and his wife leave their house. There's a whole bunch of imagery of trees. And if I'm not mistaken, one of the trees was the Ground Zero tree. Did you catch that?
I did not catch that. I could not tell what city that was supposed to be. At times I thought it was Canada. At times I thought it was Philadelphia.
I thought it was New York. There's one shot
it's
at the
almost
beginning.
like a generic big city.
There was one shot at the beginning that looked like it was near the Freedom Tower. But, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, again, it's not exactly clear.
What do you think of the dinosaurs and the creation of the universe and that thing?
Most of that was really beautiful. I didn't understand the scene where the raptor comes up, puts its claw on the other dinosaur that clearly is sick, and then walks away. I didn't understand that.
That dinosaur showed grace to the other dinosaur. That's what
that's supposed to be. Okay.
For no apparent reason, they're a dinosaur. There's no logical reason why he wouldn't just kill it and eat it.
Yeah.
But he doesn't.
Yeah.
And, that gets back into this central metaphor. It's interesting that so much of the film is talking to God, and at the same time it shows this almost brutal, godless, stars and chaos and volcanoes and cells and these things that people think of as not really connected to God, to be in the natural explanation, not being the grace. It's just interesting. It's really an interesting juxtaposition.
I understand what you're saying there, but I always took the way those scenes unfolded was like that whole creation, nature, development, evolution thing was
God's means of,
God by the grace of God is kind of how it came across to me, how I interpreted it. So, yeah.
So I'm gonna tell you a sentence. I think this sentence will really shed some light into this film. So this movie was written and directed by Terrence Malick. Terrence Malick once taught philosophy at MIT.
Okay.
This is a philosophy major's movie.
I can see that.
Yeah. So Terrence Malick's a very interesting man. Born in 1943 in Illinois. He first came onto the filmmaking scene with a movie called Badlands in the early 1970s with Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek. And then he continued to make films, but he would take long, long gaps between films. One of them was nearly 20 years between Days of Heaven in the late 70s, which was an early Richard Gere film, and his version of The Thin Red Line that came out in 97. And then he's made other films subsequent to that. He made a film about John Smith and Pocahontas called The New World, which is freaking beautiful. When I watched that on DVD, within a few minutes, I'm like, I should have seen this in the theater. It's so beautiful. And then, of course, this came out, and then I think Malick was doing something else with a lot of his career. I think he was teaching. And then he retired, and then since about 2011, he's like half of the films he's made has been in like the last 10 years. Most recently, he made a film, A Hidden Life, that came out in 2019, based on a true story of a Austrian soldier who was a conscientious objector against the Nazis, who was ultimately executed by the Nazis for his conscientious objectionism. And that's a very religious film, and this film is a very religious film. And yeah, he's great. He's beautiful and meditative, and of course the visuals are wonderful, and I should see
scoring.
more. Yeah, the scoring in
Yeah.
everything that I've seen of his, the score has been very strong.
Yeah, this is a film to process for sure. It's almost a little unfair to record right after we saw it.
Yeah.
In some ways, yeah.
Do you have more that you want to say about it, or do we want to go to final thoughts and ratings?
Well, so one other image I wanted to point out, I thought it was going to unfold a little bit differently. So it comes right after that scene that I speculated was in Goblin Valley, where young Jack and Sean Penn Jack are on the same thing, and that's that moment where you realize they're the same person. Right after that, do you remember what the next image was?
Forget.
It was in the water, and it was the like operatic mask sinking through the water. And that stood out to me. I was like, that's got to be a metaphor.
Yeah.
But I thought it was... I took it as an unmasking was upcoming, not as we've just unmasked this.
Because you knew that these were the same person.
At that point, I did.
You didn't know that until then?
I wondered, but I actually, at the beginning of the film, I actually thought we were looking at two different storylines. So I wasn't positive. Yeah, at the beginning, I thought it might have been two different storylines. Like, I didn't connect that Sean Penn was the adult version. I actually wrote down that I thought it was two different storylines, and that I thought both storylines, the people had lost a child. I actually wrote that in my notes.
Yeah.
So later on, as various things unfold, I was like, okay, what's this connection between them and Sean Penn? Clearly there's a connection, but it wasn't until that moment in that scene that I was 100% sure, okay, they're the same.
You know, we talk about the visuals of the film, and the performances are all great, and they're subtle. They're so, I mean, Jessica Chastain is just wonderful in this.
Well,
I mean, we almost forget it's her month. But
she
is
has
so
that
good at it.
moment in the yard, like, where she's float dancing in the yard outside the house. And then there's also that scene when he's doing his destructive stuff, where she's out in front of the house playing in the sprinklers.
Yeah.
You
There's
know?
the other scene where he's coming home, and the way she looks at him, like she knows he did something he shouldn't have. Doesn't necessarily know what it is.
When she's standing on the street
She's just
corner.
standing on the street corner, and he just is like sheepish as hell.
Yeah.
And it's like, and she doesn't make him stay, and he
Not right
doesn't
away.
volunteer. Yeah, but the dialogue, and I
There's also that scene at the coming to the end, right after that that mask sinking thing, and right before that afterlife scene,
the reunion at the beach,
where she says, "I give him to you."
Yeah, I give you my son, talking to Sean Penn's wife. That's a beautiful scene where everybody comes on the beach, and Sean Penn sees Jessica Chastain looking like she's in the 50s. They come up and they embrace, and I cried. And it's very powerful, and it just the juxtaposition of that and the, as I said before, the kind of the cruel nature of earlier the film, and transcending that, like even the one dinosaur does in that scene, that it's something we can transcend. But I loved a lot of the narration and some of the quotes, and there's just a few that I wrote down. There's the one where the father talks to the son and says, "Your mother's naive. It takes fierce will to get ahead in this world," and just encapsulates his philosophy, whereas her philosophy, help each other, love everyone. And the scene where talking about the memories and random memories or the things that would stick out in your mind. The kid that dies at the public pool, and he drowns at the public pool, and then there's the funeral, and they show them going to the funeral, and there's the narration from Jack. Where were you to let a boy die, to let anything happen? Why should I be good if you aren't? Oh, the grappling with God that is this movie.
Oh yeah, there is some serious and very complex faith interactions in this movie. And I really enjoyed the way that those faith interactions and challenging of faith were portrayed in this film.
Yeah.
Because it clearly comes down on the side of there being a creator.
Yeah.
But it doesn't...
It doesn't say it's easy.
And it doesn't force anything on you.
So this is a really profound picture.
Yeah.
So they have neighbors.
Oh,
in one of the early dialogues.
Yeah.
Where the Jack's very young and Brad Pitt's trying to instruct him, you need to play on our yard, not on the neighbor's yard. And he refers to the neighbors as being the Spencers. And then later on, there's something to do with the neighbors, and he's complaining, well, yeah, the Kimballs, they're wealthier than us, but he inherited it.
Yeah.
And the resentment that the dad has to the people who are wealthier than him, but also Spencer Kimball. I think that's a complete coincidence, but it registered in my brain.
Yeah. You were talking about some lines that stuck out to you. Mm-hmm. And one that stuck out to me, and it's shortly after his dad gets home from the trip, and his dad, there's multiple scenes of his dad lecturing him about how he completes his chores. And, walking around the yard, and you didn't do a good enough job pulling the weeds out of the lawn. And the dad is kind of lecturing him about something. And how old would you say young Jack is in this film?
For most of it, he's probably around between 10 and 12.
Yeah. And so there's this moment where this, at best, teenager Jack, his dad's lecturing him about his chores, and young Jack says to his father, he says, you can kick me out anytime you like.
Yeah, this is your house.
And
yeah. Well, it's the power negotiations. Yeah. It's like the desperate, and there's
But Jack's also come to this realization that while his dad was gone, like, this is not critical, and if this is this big of a deal to you, it's not going to happen for me. And that kind of, as you talked about, there's a lot of this that's illustrated in these universal things that people grapple with their parents, and things like that. But that moment where he chooses to stand up to his father, and
he talks in the film about how, because his father plays the piano, and how his father was not pleased with the way he would move the sheet music. And there's the scene where he's practicing the piano, his father's playing the piano, and the way he looks at his dad, he's like, I can't figure you out, is all over his face.
Well, and then there's also that scene where his father's playing the organ, and he finally sits on the bench next to his father, and his father seems to accept that. Yeah.
Or the one scene where, I forget the context, where they're in the yard and he just hugs his dad.
Yeah.
And I think his dad was angry about something, but it throws his dad totally off. And his dad's just kind of like, oh, okay. And he just got, he doesn't know what to do.
It's one of those chore scenes again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost like he's just trying different strategies. He's trying, because he can't figure out his dad. And he's trying to figure out how to connect with him, or to make peace with him, or do I need to challenge him? Such a good performance by Brad Pitt. As I said, it underplayed. Like, everything is subtext.
Yeah.
Like, he is a man of that generation. We see him very early in the film during the courting scenes with Jessica Chastain. He's in what looks like a Navy uniform. He's probably a World War II vet. He's just a quiet guy. He does not really know how to communicate his feelings to his family, but he is a man of deep feeling, especially the love of the music, which is not what you expect out of this blue-collar engineer in Texas.
Like when they're at dinner and, like, in the middle of one of the kids talking, he stands up to turn up the music because he likes that part of the... Now, getting back to Jessica Chastain, I can't think of a single scene where Jessica Chastain is on the screen where she's not captivating in this.
Oh, yeah.
But they are not... Her wardrobe in this film is not designed to be...
No, she's the mom.
Yeah.
And she's such a wonderful mother in this.
But despite that, she's just captivating every time
Yeah.
she's on screen.
Yeah.
And the other imagery I wanted to point out was just how prominently, I mean, the movie is called The Tree of Life, but trees are prominent in almost
they are
every scene in this.
I don't know if you caught, there was one of the very early scenes where life has come out of the ocean. One of the very first things they showed was a tree.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also that very early image of Brad Pitt as a child planting a tree with his father.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
And then there's the scene where they go to baptize the baby.
The
And
christening.
there's the christening. There's the swirl of stained glass in the church that evokes a tree.
Yeah. But just every scene, there's, at one moment or another, there's a tree, like, center frame. And, like, when they come out of the funeral, the way that they initially frame that tree coming out, they then move that scene around. But as soon as they're coming out of that funeral after the drowning at the park, the way they frame that tree and the tree in the front yard and, you know, all of those types of things. Like that Jessica Chastain dream dancing scene, float dancing, you know, in the yard with the tree as the backdrop. And, yeah.
There's scenes where the baby is, where Jack's born and where he's a toddler out in the front yard playing with the toys, and then the next child comes, and at first he's just going, I don't know about this other baby. And,
Yep.
And then there's just these little flashes. Like there's a scene where Jessica Chastain is taking the kid to the house, and you can see in the background it looks like a man's having a seizure.
Yeah,
and there's
on the
another
lawn.
man there, like trying to help him.
I thought that was Brad Pitt.
Trying to help him.
Yeah.
Yeah, there probably was.
Yeah.
But it's just these snippets of things.
Yeah.
Like, I think probably the earliest memory that I can pinpoint is being in the front yard of the first of the two houses we lived in South Jordan, and putting my hands through the grass, and my mother was there. I think that I could have been 3, or maybe, you know, very, very, you know, my first memory, and it's just such a random thing that's not connected to anything.
Yeah.
And a lot of these, especially, they just feel like specks of memory.
Yeah.
And they're very effective because of that.
Oh, yeah. At first, you don't know what to make of them, though, because you think that these are going to be plot points later on in the movie. And it's just this continuous
They're just there.
narrative.
They're just memories. Yeah, they're not all like plotted out building to one thing.
No, and they don't ever really connect.
It's a film in montage or in collage.
Yeah. But it's strikingly beautiful.
Yeah. And then the kids running around following the DDT truck.
Yeah, that one blew me away. I'm like, oh my heavens. I think I said like 3 or 4 times, oh my heavens, what in the world? You know.
Oh,
yeah.
they're spraying stuff, let's dance through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and the other thing I was going to say is the streets. In the very, very early scenes, they're not paved in that neighborhood. And then after the kids are shortly out of toddlerhood, streets are paved. They're loosely paved.
Yeah.
But they're paved. And I like that because it's subtle, but it's also true to the era. That a lot of these streets would not have been paved in 1952.
I also thought it was interesting how they depict the kids just walking down the middle of the road, but they're sidewalks.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if that was, it seemed kind of odd to me, but I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what to make of that, but it stood out to me. Mm. I also liked that scene where the dad takes them for a ride through the rich white neighborhoods and then takes them to the black neighborhood.
Yeah.
That was an interesting scene.
I think to eat, right? They go to...
they go to that barbecue.
Yeah.
But I think it was more to demonstrate how the neighborhoods interact to the kids. Yeah. You know, because he wants them to have that feeling of connection. Well, and how in those other neighborhoods nobody's out of their house. And
he has that talk with Jack where he says, I know I'm probably hard on you, but everything I do is to make you stronger and so that you can be your own boss.
Yeah.
It's like, that's this guy's dream.
Yeah.
Like, that's what he wishes. He wishes that he could have either pursued the music or he could have been his own boss.
Yeah.
And he has these resentments that are not unearned.
Yeah, there's that court scene where he loses the court case about the 27 patents, and Yeah.
Or even when he takes the kids on the drive is after he'd had that run-in with the guy at church who's probably a deacon or something. So the guy who thinks he's the fourth member of the Trinity and blah, blah, blah. And he's just going off on
I
him.
forgot about that line. Yeah. Well, how would you rate this movie?
This is, I don't see how it could be better. It's just beautiful. It's as I said before. It's hard to think of it as a movie. It's a film.
Uh-huh.
And it's 4 stars, 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so its own thing. Yeah, I loved it.
I'm not quite as high on this one as you are. This is strikingly beautiful, and there's a lot of imagery there. I think this needs to settle a little bit.
Yeah.
But the way it unfolds and just the way things didn't connect until the very end for me, like, and even then it wasn't blatantly clear, and then just the way it wraps up, you're just like, okay, what was, some of it just never clarified. So for me, this is a 3.5 star. I'm torn between an 8 and a 9, but this is an experience.
Yeah, it is an experience, and
Yeah.
I think you will find, for me, for watching it the second time, and as I've said many times before, the first time I watch a movie, I'm trying to get a handle of what it is and what the structure is. And once you have that, I think you'll enjoy it more in a second viewing.
That's entirely possible. Again, this film, just the way it is, and it requires digestion. It requires contemplation. Yeah. It's not a quick, simple view of film, and not something that you're going to process in under 5 minutes and record a podcast about.
Exactly.
So, anything else to add on this one?
No.
Actually, I guess we
recommend.
should look at a couple of our typical things. Shockingly, this aggregate score on IMDb for this film is 6.8 stars.
Boo. It's not for everybody. I can see certain people that say, "Oh, it's a Brad Pitt movie." What the hell was that?
Yeah. Do you know much about how this did in the theaters?
I don't imagine it did very well financially.
I was curious. This was nominated for 3 Oscars.
Cinematography?
Best Directing, Achievement in Directing, Cinematography, and Best Motion Picture of the Year.
Yeah.
I don't recall what actually won that year off the top of my head. This had an estimated budget of $32 million.
Wow.
Its opening weekend is given in France, and so it was 1.3. It says it had domestic gross of 13.3 million and a worldwide gross of 58.4 million.
So it did make money good.
Yeah, at least worldwide.
I can see Malick being more appreciated in Europe than America.
Yeah.
Did you know that this film wasn't originally supposed to have the dinosaurs?
Really?
Yeah, the dinosaurs came in later because Malick was involved with a film that was being made for IMAX, a nature documentary, a Creation of the Universe dinosaur documentary.
Yeah.
It's like, what if we put that in here?
Yeah.
I think it works. Some people really didn't like it from scanning some of the critical reviews. They didn't like that distraction. They just liked the kind of the middle part, the childhood part. But I liked the way it just framed it. It made you look at it different.
Well, I can see how the incomplete, unconnected narrative might throw some people off, or some people might not have appreciated that. I knew nothing about this going into it.
Are you glad you knew nothing about it?
I'm not sure yet.
Part of me was thinking, because it is so different, that it might make you angry. Because you're not expecting it.
No, for me, the complexity of those faith interactions won me over pretty early. I like something that... trying to think of the right words to phrase this. I was going to say challenges faith, but that's not the way
Explores
I want to
faith.
phrase that. But yeah, explores faith, but in multiple ways. And at the same time, I guess, again, I'm struggling to fill out this thought, but for not having thought this out, that comes back to the faith. This is clearly, to me, the end of this film, like a big part of this point, is it doesn't matter. It's, grace. That Jessica Chastain opening thing about, grace versus nature, and how she goes on and on about the way of grace. I think this film certainly ends in the way of grace.
You know what?
And that was, to me, after those complex faith interactions and the way it explores faith and then comes back to the way of grace, I really enjoyed that.
The thing that this reminded me of more than anything wasn't in another movie or anything. It was a novel. It was John Steinbeck's East of Eden,
which is on my list, but I haven't read.
which is about this. It's about faith, and it's about, I mean, it doesn't use the same terms, but it's about the God of nature versus, the way of nature and the way of grace. Yeah.
Okay, well, anything else to add on this one?
No, but I highly recommend.
I do too. I'm Rob.
I'm Nate.
And this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast.
Kind of a nice long one. As we were watching this, I was like, part of me really wanted to just start talking about it.
Why did you think it was going to piss me off?
I don't know. I think because it was slow, and because my memory was the dinosaurs were like the first 40 minutes. Like I misremembered it, and I thought you'd be like, "What the hell is this?"
I did think, "What the hell is this?" at several points, but it wasn't in a
negative way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had because it's been 9 years since I've seen it, and so a lot of it had kind of gone into the fog. But yeah, it's great. It's it's just so beautiful.
You ready for probably our most awkward transition ever?
Are we going to do that here, or are we going to do that as another episode?
Oh, we're going to do it as another episode, but you ready to transition to Unhinged?
Yeah.